At heart this evening, we're talking about happiness. At least that's the frame of the debate that we have tonight. And you've both been, in your work and also tonight, very critical of happiness as mere hedonism, pleasure-seeking, or even simply as a feeling. What does true or deeper human happiness consist of, and how is it attained?
You? I don't care.
Well, I don't, first of all, there's something you said 5 minutes ago or so, I think you were still at the podium, that I agree with profoundly, which is that happiness is a side effect. It's not a thing in itself. It's something that comes upon you. It's like an act of grace in some sense. And my sense is
I accept even the theological undertone of what you said.
Okay,
no, the category of grace can be used in a perfect atheist sense. It's one of the deepest categories.
Yeah, well,
I'm sorry.
Okay, good. Well, I would think that we could find agreement about that partly because of your psychoanalytic background. You know perfectly well that we're subject to forces within us that aren't of our voluntary control. And certainly happiness is one of those, because you cannot will yourself to be happy. You might be able to will yourself to be unhappy, but you can't will yourself to be happy. There are certain preconditions that have to be met that are quite mysterious in order for you to be happy, and then it happens. And then maybe, if you're wise, you regard that as a minor incomprehensible miracle that somehow you happen to be in the right place at the right time. Now, I've made the case that the most effective means of pursuing the good life, which is not the same as pursuing happiness, is to adopt something like a stance of maximal responsibility towards the suffering and malevolence in the world. And I think that that should be pursued primarily as an individual responsibility. It's not like I don't think that political and familial larger organizations are necessary, but in the final analysis, we each suffer alone in some fundamental sense, and we have our own malevolence to contend with in some fundamental sense, and the proper beginning of moral behavior, which is the proper beginning of the right way to act in the world, is to take responsibility for that. I think you do what you can to conceptualize the highest good that you can conceptualize. That's the first thing, to develop a vision of what might be. And it has to be a personalized vision as well as a universalized vision. And then you work diligently to ensure that your actions are in keeping with that, and you allow yourself on that pursuit to be informed by the knowledge of your ignorance and the necessity for acting and speaking in truth. And a fair bit of that, I believe, is derived, I think it's fair to say that that's derived from an underlying Judeo-Christian ethic, and I make no bones about the fact that I think of those stories metaphysically or philosophically or psychologically as fundamental to the proper functioning of our society insofar as it can function properly. And so it's not happiness, it's meaning. And meaning is to be found in the adoption of responsibility. And then I'll close with this. Responsibility is not only to do what you believe to be right. That's not, because that's duty. That's not enough. That's sort of what the conservatives put forward as the ultimate virtue, which is duty. It's not that. It's that you're acting in a manner that is in accordance with what you believe to be right, but you're doing it in a manner that simultaneously expands your ability to do it, which means that you cannot stay safely ensconced within the confines of your current ethical beliefs. You have to stand on the edge of what you know and encounter continually the consequences of your ignorance to expand your domain of knowledge and ability so that you're not only acting in an efficient manner, but you're increasing the efficiency and productivity and meaningfulness of what it is that you're engaged in. And I think that, and I believe that the psychological evidence supports this, even the neuropsychological evidence, is that that's when true happiness descends upon you. Because it's an indication from the deepest recesses of your psyche, biologically instantiated, that you're in the right place at the right time. You're doing what you should be doing, but you're doing it in a manner that expands your capacity to do even better things in the future. And I think that's the deepest human instinct there is. It's not rational. It's far deeper than that. And it's something that's genuine and that exists within us, and that constitutes a proper guide if you don't pervert it with self-deception and deceit. So that's my perspective.
Yes, okay. I'll try, if you are stupid enough to believe me, to be brief. You know? First, I like very much what you began with, this grace, or whatever we call it, moment of happiness. And I would like to, would you agree that the same goes for love, I think? We have in English, and they have it in French. I don't know if in other languages they have it. We use the verb to fall in love, which means it's in this sense, in some sense, a fall. You are surprised, you are shocked. Authentic love, I think, is something very traumatic, even in this sense. I always like to use this example. Let's say you live a stupidly happy life. Maybe one night stand here and there, you drink with friends, then you fall in love passionately. This is, in some sense, a catastrophe for your life. All the balance is lost, and so on.
Yes,
you know.
That's why Cupid has arrows.
Sorry? Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, where I, second, surprisingly maybe for you, I agree with your point about Judeo-Christian legacy, for which I am very much attacked, Eurocentrist, and so on and so on. You know, I wonder if you would agree with it. I will try to condense it very much. You know what's for me the deepest, I simplify to the utmost, something unheard of, and I, as an atheist, accept the spiritual value of it, happens in Christianity. In other religions, you have God up there, we fall from God, and then we try to climb back through spiritual discipline, whatever, training, good deeds, and so on and so on. The formula of Christianity is a totally different one. As we philosophers would have put it, you don't climb to God. You are free in a Christian sense when you discover that the distance that separates you from God is inscribed into God himself. That's why I agree with those intelligent theologists, like my favorite, Gilbert Keith Chesterton, who said that the cross, the crucifixion, is something absolutely unique, because in that moment of Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, God, Father, why have you abandoned me? For a brief moment, symbolically, God himself becomes an atheist, in the sense of, you get a gap there. And that is something so absolutely unique. It means that you are not simply separated from God. Your separation from God is part of divinity itself. And we can then put it also in other terms, maybe closer to you, like that. That's why, for me, happiness is not some blissful unity with highest value. It's the very struggle, the fall, and so on. And that's why I hope we both worry about what will this possibility of so-called, I'm horrified with it, what Ray Kurzweil calls singularity and this blissful state. I prefer not to know, but the final point, very brief. What I only don't quite get, why do you put so much access to this? We have to begin with a personal change. I mean, this is also the second, or which one? I don't remember, forgive me, of your slogans in your book. First set your house in order, then. But I have an extremely common sense, naive question here. But what if in trying to set your house in order, you discover that your house is in disorder precisely because the way the society is messed up, which doesn't mean, okay, let's forget about my house. But you can do both at the same time, and I would even say, I will give you now the ultimate example, yourself. Isn't it that you are so socially active? Because you realize that it's not enough to tell to your patients, set your house in order. Much of the reason of why they are in disorder, their house, is that There is some crisis in our society and so on and so on. So my reproach to you, benevolent, would have been, you know, the joke, tea or coffee, yes, please. Like individual or social, yes, please, because this is obvious in extreme situation. Like, I hope we agree to say to somebody in North Korea, set your house in order, no? Haha. But I think in some deeper sense, it goes also for our societies. I'm just repeating what you are telling. You see some kind of a social crisis, and I don't see clearly why insist so much on this choice. Because, sorry, just to finish, I will give you an example that I think perfectly does it. How do we usually deal with ecology? By this false personalization, you know. They tell you, what did you do? Did you put all the Coke cans on the side? Did you recycle all paper and so? Yes, we should do this. But, you know, like, in a way, this is also a very easy way to discharge yourself. Like, you say, okay, I do the recycling, so up, you know, I did my duty, let's go on. So I would just say, why the choice there?
Okay, so first of all, I have to point out that you have unfairly tasked me with 3 very difficult questions. And so I'm hoping that I can...
That's life, that's life. As you said, life is a challenge.
Yes,
and so on.
So I'm hoping that I have the mental wherewithal to keep them in track and answer them in order, but you can help me if I stray. I was very interested in your comments about Christ's atheism on the cross, that final moment of atheism. That's something I'd never thought about in that way.
Chesterton orthodoxy. A short book, excellent.
No, it's a very interesting thought, because it's an unbelievably merciful idea in some sense, that the burden of life is so unbearable. And you see in the Christian passion, of course, torture, unfair judgment by society, betrayal by friends, and then a low death. And so that's about as bad as it gets, right? Which is why it's an archetypal story, right? It's about as bad as it gets. And the story that you describe points out that it's so bad that even God himself might despair about the essential quality of being.
Yeah.
Right. So that is merciful in some sense, because it does say that there is something that's built into the fabric of existence that tests us so severely in our faith about being itself that even God himself falls prey to the temptation to doubt. And so that's, okay, now, this is where things get very complicated, because I want to use that in part to answer the other questions that you answered. Look, there's a very large clinical literature that suggests that if you want to develop optimal resilience, what you do is you lay out a pathway towards somewhere better. Someone comes in, they have a problem. You try to figure out what the problem is, and then you try to figure out what might constitute a solution. And so you have something approximating a map, right? And it's a tentative map of how to get from where things aren't so good to where they're better. And then you have the person go out in the world and confront those things that they're avoiding, that are stopping them from moving towards that higher place. And there's an archetypal reality to that. You're in a fallen state, you're attempting to redeem yourself, and there's a process by which that has to occur. And that process involves voluntary confrontation with what you're afraid of, disgusted by, and inclined to avoid. And that works. Every psychological school agrees upon that, is that exposure therapy, the psychoanalysts expose you to the tragedies of your past, you know, and redeem you in that manner. And the behaviorists expose you to the terrors of the present and redeem you in that manner. But there's a broad agreement across psychological schools that that works. And my sense is that we're called upon as individuals precisely to do that in our life, is that we are faced by this unbearable reality that you made reference to when you talked about the situation on the cross, is that life itself is fundamentally, and this is a pessimism that we might share, is fundamentally suffering and malevolence. But, and this is, I think, where we differ, I believe that the evidence suggests that the light that you discover in your life is proportionate to the amount of the darkness that you're willing to forthrightly confront, and that there's no necessary upper limit to that. So I think that the good that people are capable of is actually, it's a higher good than the evil that people are capable of. And believe me, I do not say that lightly, given what I know about the evil that people are capable of. And I believe that the central psychological message of the biblical corpus, fundamentally, is that. That's why it culminates, in some sense, with the idea that it's necessary to adopt, it's necessary to confront the devil and to accept your, what would you say, the unjustness of your tortured mortality. If you can do that, it's a challenge, as you just pointed out, that's sufficient to challenge even God himself, that you have the best chance of transcending it and living the kind of life that will set your house in order and everyone's house in order at the same time. And so I think that's even true in states like North Korea. And I'm not asking people to foolishly immolate themselves for pointless reasons, you know. When I'm working with people who are clinically and they have a terrible oppressor who's their boss at work, I don't suggest that they march in and tell them exactly what they think of them and end up on the street. It's not helpful, you know. And so the pathway towards adopting individual responsibility happens to be a very individual one. But I do believe that the best bet for most people is to solve the problems that beset them in their own lives, the ethical problems that beset them, that they know are problems, and that they can set themselves together well enough so that they can then become capable of addressing larger scale problems without falling prey to some of the errors that characterize, let's say, over-optimistic and intellectually arrogant ideologues. I'll close, well,
yeah, but very briefly.
Let me close with one thing. One of my favorite quotes from Carl Jung, it's actually a quote that I used at the beginning of my first book, which was called Maps of Meaning, was that if you take a personal problem seriously enough, you will simultaneously solve a social problem. And this bears on your point, because it's not like your small family, even the relationship between you and your wife, is immune in some sense to the broader social problems around you. And so let's say right now there's tremendous tension between men and women in the West, and that's certainly the case given the divorce rate. Let's say that would be some evidence. And the later and later ages that people are waiting to become, enter into permanent relationships. There's a real tension there. And then if you do establish a relationship with a woman or a partner, but we'll say a woman in this particular case, you are instantly faced with all of the sociological problems in a microcosm in that relationship. And then if you work those damn problems out, if you can work them out within your relationship, then you can get some insight. It's not complete insight, but you can get some partial insight into what the problem actually is and get the diagnosis right, and you've moved some small measure forward in addressing what might constitute the broader social concern. And what's even better, you're punished for your own goddamn mistakes. And that's another thing I like about the idea of working locally, is that, if I do broad-scale social experiments and they fail, it's like, well, tough luck for the people for whom they failed. But if I'm experimenting on myself within the confines of my own relationship and I make a mistake, I'm going to feel the pain. And that's good, that's just, but it also gives me the possibility of learning. And so I believe that you do solve what you can about yourself first before you can set your family straight and before you should dare to try to set the world straight. Otherwise you degenerate into this kind of, you already talked about it, this shallow moralizing, well, I've divided my goddamn Coke cans up, and now I can spend more money on new packaging at the supermarket, which is exactly what the psychological research indicates that people do if they perform a casual moral action. They immediately justify committing a less moral action because they've put themselves in a higher moral place. And you might, if you were a real pessimist, you'd say, well, that's why they performed the action to begin with. I think that's often true. That's associated with that shallow moralizing.
Are we too much in this direction, or again, I will put in my Stalinist terms, would you go as far as to say, who needs the people? We talk for the people, and we know better than the people. No, because I don't want to take too much of the time for the public, but you know what interests me? Would you then agree, because this is how Hegel reads the story of the fall, that fall really is felix culpa, in the sense that for Hegel, before the fall, we are simply animals. It's through the fall that you perceive goodness as what will drag you out of the fall. So in this sense, fall is constitutive of the very, you know, it's not you fall from goodness. You fall, and that's the dialectical paradox. Your fall retroactively creates what you fell from, as it were. And that's the tough lesson for cheap moralists to accept. But you know where I see, very briefly, maybe a counter question. What fascinates me, we didn't cover this, I didn't cover this, but speaking about ideology, would you agree, what fascinates me more and more is not big ideology in the sense of projects and so on. In our cynical era, people claim, oh, we no longer take them seriously and so on. But, and here, for me, social dimensions enters even our intimate space. Implicit beliefs, ideological presuppositions, why not, which we embody in our most common daily practices. For example, probably some of you already know it, I will nonetheless repeat a very shortened version. I was occupied at some point by the structure of toilets in Western Europe. I noticed this specificity of German toilets, where, you know, the shit doesn't disappear in water, it is there exposed so that you smell it and control it for whatever, and I immediately associated it with German spirit of poetry and reflection and so on. It's a bad joke, but what I'm saying is that in a sense, and I've spoken with some specialists, I was so intrigued by how do you construct toilets, and they admitted it. There is no direct utilitarian reason. It is as if, even in something as vulgar as going to the toilet, ideology in this deeper sense is there. Another thing that at the same level, I repeat one of my old jokes, that fascinates me intensely is how it's not just as superficial psychoanalysts claim, we pretend to be moral to believe, but deeply we are cynical egotists. Quite often in today's times, we think that we are free, permissive, and so on, but secretly we are dominated by an entire pathological, or not even often pathological, structure of prohibitions and so on. So we may, and this is what interests me so much, precisely in today's time where, and this is how, would you agree, we would explain these simple facts which may appear weird, that how apparently they tell us we live in permissive times. Take your pleasure, enjoy it. But at the same time, there is probably, so some clinicians are telling me, more frigidity and impotence than ever.
Yes.
That the lesson of psychoanalysis, I hope we agree, is not this vulgar one. You cannot perform sexually, you go to a psychiatrist, he teaches you how to get rid of authority and so on. It's a much more complex situation. It's and this is what interests me immensely. All this set of implicit beliefs, how you don't even know, but you know, I will repeat the story that half of you know, and you, my favorite, that Niels Bohr anecdote. You know, he had a house outside Copenhagen, the quantum physics guy, and he had a horseshoe, a superstitious, above his door, yes, and then a friend asked him, but do you believe in it? Why do you have it there? And he said, of course not, I'm a scientist. Why then do you have it there? Because I was told it works. The idea is it prevents evil spirits to enter the house. It works even if you don't believe in it. Ne? That's ideology today. That's ideology today. It's fundamental.
Okay, so
I want to solicit from you to tell a joke. Don't you see this?
I think that people. I think that people are possessed by ideas that aren't theirs. And their personalities that aren't theirs. And that's the great psychoanalytic insight. It's not ideas, it's personalities. It's way worse than ideas. And some of those personalities might be the ones that are associated with the idea that freedom is found in maximizing hedonistic moment-to-moment pleasure or something like that, which sounds like freedom. Like for me, one of the things that I suggest to people is that they watch themselves as if they do not understand who they are or what they're ruled by. And then notice those times when they're where they should be. And that's back to our discussion about meaning rather than happiness. It's like you'll see there are times that in your life where you're somewhere or you've done something and all of a sudden you're together. You're where you should be. Your conscience is not disturbing you. You're not proud of what you did, because pride is the wrong term, but you understand deeply that you've done something that you should have done. You might not understand why. You might not even understand what it is. But the study of that can help elucidate the difference between what actually constitutes you, which is a very difficult thing to discover, and what constitutes the accretion that characterizes you because of the, well, let's say your intense proclivity for socialized mimicry. And so, you know, I don't mean you personally, but people are amalgams of everything they've seen and everything every person they've watched. Yes, and everything they've read. And to integrate that and to find the truth that constitutes that integration is an incredibly difficult endeavor. And one of the reasons why in 12 Rules for Life, for example, I suggested that people try to tell the truth or at least don't lie is because one of the ways, apart from pursuing what appears to you to be meaningful, one of the ways of escaping from that possession by the kind of ideology that you're describing, which is it's like an unconscious of unidentified axioms. It's something like that. Even though they take personified form, they're like personalities, is to stop saying things you know not to be true. It's a nice pathway forward. The original rule was tell the truth. And I thought, no, that's not any good, because you're so biased and limited and ignorant and possessed that you don't know what the truth is. And so you can't be asked to tell it. But everyone does have the experience of being about to say or do something that they know by their own, they know as deeply as they can know anything about themselves, that utterance or action is wrong, and they still do it. Now, my suggestion is try to stop doing that. And one of the consequences, well, you can try in small ways, like you might not be able to manage it in big ways, but now and then, you know, you're tempted to do something that you know to be wrong, and you could not do it. And if you practice that, you get better and better at not doing it, and that means you lie less, and you take the easy route out less, and you pursue hedonic pleasures that cost you in the future less. You start to straighten yourself out. You take the beam out of your eye. That's essentially what you're doing. And over time, you have some modicum of hope that your vision will clear up and you'll be able to see the proper pathway forward. And that's part of the process of redemption. And it seems to me to be in your grasp. You're capable of doing that. You have a conscience. It does inform you from time to time correctly about the difference between good and evil, the consequence, the knowledge, the consequence of the fall that you described, which I think you described in very eloquent terms, and that you can slowly make your way back to the straight and narrow path that's characterized by maximal meaning, but also, see, this instinct of meaning is a sophisticated one. It's not that I'm making a case for the individual, like Ayn Rand makes a case for the individual. That's not it. I'm making a case for individual responsibility. That's not the same thing. It's like there is something that's good for you, but it has to also be good for your family. If it's just good for you, that's not good enough. And if it's good for you and your family and it's not good for society, then that's not good enough either. And so the responsibility is to find a pathway that balances these things in a harmonious manner. It's like I got a lot of this thinking from Jean Piaget and his idea of equilibrated states, right? Is you're attempting to find something like a game that everyone is willing to play that can be played in an iterative manner and not degenerate. Well, hopefully actually ascend, if that's possible, hopefully become a better and better game across time. And I do believe that you can do that. I do believe that you can do that if you're guided by truth, and I do believe that the pathway to that is the phenomenology of meaning. And then the secondary consequence of that is, if you do that, now and then you might be happy. And then you should be profoundly grateful, because happiness, as we already agreed upon, is something like a grace.
What basically, sorry. Again, my pessimism comes here. I agree with you, but the danger here ideology can massively enter. You describe a nice situation. You are tempted or ordered or whatever to do something that you know it's wrong. But so-called totalitarian ideologies step in at this point and try to present to you that the true greatness is to do what you individually think it's wrong for the higher cause. You know who says this wonderfully? A horrible guy, Heinrich Himmler of SS. No, sorry, seriously.
No,
he knew the problem.
Yes.
German officers must do horrible things.
Yes.
Kill Jewish, and his solution was double. First, to let them know, as he put it somewhere, every idiot, okay, ordinary man can do something great, maybe, not all, sacrifice himself for his country. But his reply was, his point was, but it takes a truly great man to be ready to lose his soul and to do horrible things for his country.
Yeah.
And I read some good memoirs of relatively honest communists who broke down when they were sent to the countryside famine in early 30s. And this is what they were told by apparatchik. You will see horrible things, children starving and so on. Remember, there is the higher cause, and your highest ethical duty is to overcome this small bourgeois sentimentality. And so here I see the danger of, again my pessimism, false meaning, which can massively cover this false narrative. Second thing, also the solution by, I wonder if you share this pessimism of mine, another one by Himmler. You know what was his sacred book I read? He all the time had a special leather-bound copy in his pocket, Bhagavad Gita. He said, his problem was this one. He puts it perfectly. Nazi officers have to do SS horrible things. How to enable them to do it without themselves becoming horrible beings? His solution was Oriental wisdom. To learn to act from distance, I am not really there, and this was the shock of my life. Based on this, do you know the book? I found a book, the guy then wrote many books, Brian Victoria, Zen at War. It's a shocking book, especially horrible for many so-called anti-Eurocentrists who claim our monotheism is guilty of everything, we need Oriental. Yeah, but that book is about the, apart from a couple of exceptions, the behavior of Zen Buddhist community in Japan in the 30s, early 40s. Not only they totally supported Japanese expansion into China, they even provided properly Zen Buddhist justification for it. For example, the one, you know who did this? No, you are not as old as me. I remember him D.T. Suzuki, the great yeah, but okay, he was doing this in the 60s, but as a younger guy, he was fully supporting Japanese militarism, and one of his justifications was this one: the advice of Japanese military to them to support Zen Buddhist training. Because he says, it's one of the most horrifying things that I've ever read, he said, sorry, don't take it personally, but let's say an officer orders me, if I were to tell this to you, it would be too obvious, so I pick you, I have to kill you, stab you with my knife. And he says, if I remain in this illusionary self, then I feel responsible, I kill you. But he says, if you are enlightened by Zen Buddhism, then you know there is no substantial reality, you become a neutral observer of your life, just a flow of phenomena, and you tell yourself, it's not that I am killing you, but in the cosmic dance of phenomena, my knife is floating and somehow your knife false. You know what I'm saying? This, I'm not disputing some spiritual greatness of Zen Buddhism. I'm saying how even the most enlightened this spiritual experience can serve a terrible cause.
Now, because we're running very quickly out of time, and it's clear that this conversation could go for a very long time, I'm going to ask one representative question here and give you each 1 minute each. And that is simply this. Coming from online, what is one thing you hope people will leave this debate with, and why? Jordan.
I hope they leave this debate with a belief in the power of communication between people with different views. You know, that's... I mean, there is a growing idea on college campuses, tell me if I go over my minute, that there really is no such thing as free speech because people are only the avatars of their group identity and they have nothing unique to say. And besides that, there's no communication across boundaries of identity or belief. And I think that that's an unbelievably dangerous and pernicious doctrine. And I think that people of goodwill, despite their differences, can communicate, and they can both come out of that communication improved, even though there might be some dissent and some dissent on the way. And so that's what I would hope people would come out of this.
Thank you.
I will be more concrete, even politically. There is today, so it appears, this big conflict between all that postmodern stuff that you oppose and this alt-right and so on. I hope sincerely that we made at least some people to think and to reject this simple opposition. There are quite reasonable... the only alternative to alt-right is not political correctness and so on. And now I'm speaking not for you, but for me. Please, if you are a leftist, don't feel obliged to be politically correct. Think, don't be afraid to think. And especially, would you agree, one great version of not thinking is how immediately, if they don't agree with you, you are labeled a fascist. But that's the laziness. People find something they don't agree with, instead of thinking, they think about something we all agree was a bad thing, you are a fascist, and so on. You know, it's not as simple as that. Even Trump, of whom I'm deeply critical, no, I'm sorry to tell you, yes, he is a catastrophe in the long term and so on, but he is not a fascist. You make it all too easy to play these games. I just want not a positive result, but to shatter you a little bit, to make you think.
I have always felt that the greatest conversations are unfinished ones. Please join me in thanking Slavoj Žižek and Jordan Peterson for a great unfinished conversation.
It's nice that we survived this. I mean, now.
Thank you so much. So we waved everyone all right.